Welcome and thank you for listening to this webcast, which has been brought to you by Break, the road safety charity. This webcast is one in a series on the topic of saving money through fleet risk management, which has kindly been sponsored by BT Fleet. During this webinar, we are going to hear from Dr. Will Murray, who is Research Director at Interactive Driving Systems. Thank you very much, Will.
Hello, and thank you to BT Fleet and Break for the opportunity to be part of this webcast. Over the next few minutes, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time to focus on some of the financial aspects of fleet or work-related road safety. The session really has 5 or 6 main aims. So I want to focus on some general reasons why work-related road safety is important. Want to look at how we can quantify the costs of collisions. Want to look at some of the hidden costs and some cost icebergs. I want to look at a cost model which you can use very, very easily to quantify your costs and to clearly make the business case for work-related road safety. I want to look at some data on cost by collision types and how you can use that data to target interventions. I want to say a little bit about risk financing and the importance of funding road safety programs, and then I'll just leave you with a few thoughts and recommendations. So, why is work-related road safety important, or what is the business case for work-related road safety? We tend to look at this in terms of 4 main areas or 4 main reasons to focus on the topic. Obviously, societal reasons. Driving typically is the biggest risk that most people face, particularly in a work context, and particularly when as it happens, commuting to and from work. There's much more data from all around the world now on the extent to which work-related driving is part of the road toll, and also the extent to which it's part of worker fatalities. There's a whole range of legal reasons to focus on work-related road safety. Particularly, I'll draw your attention to health and safety regulations, some transport regulations, and also some corporate requirements. In the UK, particularly, we have the Health and Safety Executive and Department for Transport guidance on driving at work, which is shown on the right-hand side of the page. That was framed by some EU legislation called EC 89391, which is the Framework Directive for Health and Safety, which I would encourage you to look at because it underpins this area, and in recent times it's just been confirmed that the vehicle is part of the workplace under those regulations in that Framework Directive. I'd also draw your attention to some work that DG Employment is doing in the EU at the moment on work-related vehicle risks. That is a really good project which has some very good pan-European guidance and also good practice case studies and so on. As well as the legal and societal reasons, there are also a range of business reasons in a link to your brand, your reputation, corporate social responsibility, etc. But the main emphasis of this session today is on costs and how we can use costs to identify the level of risk in the organization and then to quantify opportunities to reduce those risks. What I'd like you to do is just think of how much collisions cost your organization. Think of your total collision cost, or think of the cost of the most recent collision that your organization was involved in. If you'd like to participate, then just write down the approximate repair costs of your organization's last vehicle collision, or perhaps your total annual vehicle repair bill linked to road collisions. What we'll do in a few moments is just come back to that and have a look in a bit more detail. As you'll see from this image, art was not my best subject in school, but the iceberg shown in the picture with the above the waterline costs and the below the waterline costs gives an idea in terms of how you can start to quantify the full costs of road collisions. So clearly, above the waterline is the obvious repair costs. Below the waterline are the less obvious or hidden costs, which could include things like customer service, downtime, loss of key workers, administration, investigation time, third-party costs, etc. And what we're going to do is just have a look at this iceberg and start to identify what the full costs of collisions are. You can split road safety costs into several different categories. On the screen at the moment, you can see lists of vehicle and driver-related costs. Again, I won't read through each one of those word for word, but if you can start to just think about the cost figure you've already written down, and then just start to have a look at the lists here and see if there's anything extra that you might have missed when you wrote down that first cost for vehicle repairs. So were there any recovery costs? What was the downtime? Did we need to get a new vehicle or a hire vehicle in? Did it have any impact on our insurance or our premiums? In terms of our drivers, were there any implications for drivers in terms of counselling or compensation or reassessment and training or investigations? You can see from this that there are quite a few significant areas of cost involved in collisions. Going a bit further, if a third party was involved in any of those collisions or the collision that you wrote down, then just factor in the extra costs related to third parties. And then on the right-hand side, there are just a range of other costs, so redelivery costs, late delivery penalties, maybe customer service failures, any kind of reputational damage. Where this is leading is that the costs of collisions can be much higher for organisations than just the obvious vehicle and vehicle repair costs. The Health and Safety Executive has done some great work in this area around the vehicle costs and safety costs, and I'll just draw your attention to their website, which has some really good information in relation to the full costs of safety. What we can do now is just start to have a look at our original cost that we wrote down a few minutes ago and start to think about what the actual true cost might be. Several bits of data on what the hidden costs of collisions are. So for example, the British School of Motoring says that the hidden costs are somewhere between 6 and 53 times the obvious costs of collisions. Now, you may say, well, they would say that, wouldn't they, because they're a driver training company and they want to sell more driver training courses, which may or may not be the case, but there's some pretty robust data behind those figures. If you want to look at some government figures, the Health and Safety Executive in the UK say that the hidden costs of safety is somewhere between 8 and 36 times the obvious costs. So Australian data, from when we've done projects there, suggests that the hidden costs are somewhere between 4 and 20 times what the obvious repair costs are. Now, there are some reasons for the Australian difference due to kind of workers' compensation and some of the injury costs being taken centrally rather than by the organisation. But still the case that a significant proportion of the total costs of an incident or collision are hidden or quite often not factored into the overall cost. In our modelling work at Interactive Driving Systems, we tend to work on a hidden cost ratio of somewhere between 1.5 and 2 times the obvious or hidden costs. And I'll just explain that now in a bit more detail through a simple worked example. On the table in front of you, you can see the model which has helped, for example, British Telecom to understand that they needed to sell something like 600,000 broadbands just to generate the revenue to pay for their collisions. Same model helped Nestle understand that they needed to sell 235 million Kit Kats to generate the revenue to fund their European motor insurance. Both those organisations have used this kind of model to significantly target work-related road safety over the last 10 or 15 years. And again, both have seen massive reductions in terms of their collisions and costs by focusing on this area in this way. So just to work through the example, And I should say actually that if you would like the spreadsheet model that sits behind this, that you can plug in very simply your data and come up with a model, and a detailed 5-year model in terms of likely future cost scenarios. If you email me through the link on the page, I will happily share that model with you and talk you through how to use it. Okay, so if you take a collision that costs the organisation €1,000 in terms of own vehicle damage, there was a third party involved in this case, so another €1,000 on third party costs. Third party was slightly injured, a little bit of whiplash, which then went through their lawyers, and they managed to squeeze €1,000 of compensation for the third party driver, which gives a reported cost of that collision of €3,000. If we then assume that the hidden cost of that collision is twice as much again, or the same again as the obvious cost, that collision truly cost the organisation €6,000. If we then say that the organisation had a profit margin of 10%, just to keep the numbers simple, that means that they need to generate €60,000 or pounds or dollars just to generate the revenue to pay for that one £3,000 pounds, euros or dollars collision. And the argument in this case really is it easier to generate £60,000 of new business, or to do something about a £1,000 collision? And in most cases, clearly, you're already managing your fleet. You already have good processes in place to deal with the fleet. So the more we can do to reduce collisions, the most positive impact it's going to have on our bottom line in terms of profitability and costs. And that's a really useful model, which, as I've already said, I'll happily share with you. Just one worked example, an actual example based on a wing mirror repair. Some organisations don't even include their wing mirror damage as collisions. They just repair them as general maintenance. In this particular case, the organisation identified that they needed to generate £10,000 worth of revenue to generate the revenue essentially to pay for that one wing mirror, which cost £290 to replace. When they looked at it in more detail, they realised that they were losing tens of thousands of wing mirrors each year, which weren't really being noticed because they were going through as general maintenance. By focusing on it, they were able to significantly reduce the number of wing mirror losses, which had a major impact on their costs. Also had a major impact on their safety, because in reality, a wing mirror is actually only a few centimetres from the driver. So the more you can do to reduce those kinds of minor damage events, the better in terms of reducing collisions overall, and also reducing the potential for harm. Now that we've focused on costs and the hidden costs, I'd like to just look at how we can start to use cost data to start to target collision reductions. So on the next slide, which you can now see in front of you, you can see collision costs by type. So you can see that, for example, rear-end collisions or hitting the third party of the vehicle in front, in this particular scenario, made up around about 3.4% of claims. But then when you looked at the cost of claims, made up around about 14.4% of the costs. What this means is that rear-end collisions tend to be relatively high-cost collision types, whereas the slower speed minor damage events, such as the client vehicle being hit whilst parked, or the reversing collisions, tend to be a little bit cheaper, but there are more of them. And in this case, the organisation used this data to target their training in much more depth at defensive driving rear-end collisions, where drivers were involved in that type of event, but more particularly to be much more focused and targeted on slow-speed manoeuvring and how they could impact on slow-speed manoeuvring events through, for example, focusing on reversing, focusing on site-based training, focusing on car parks, focusing on collection and delivery points for the commercial vehicles. And they were able to use this data to make a significant impact in terms of their collisions. Just want to show you a second example based on costs. This data is slightly different in that it focuses particularly on third-party collisions rather than all collisions, but it just shows the potential impact of quantifying the numbers of events of each type, looking at the opportunity to reduce each specific event type, and over a 3-year time period they were able to reduce almost all of their specific collision types by targeting interventions specifically at those areas of risk. And if you look at the data on the bottom of the slide there, you'll see that the numbers of collisions reduced significantly over time, as did the collision costs. So by focusing on the event types and the cost of those event types, and using that to drive interventions, you can put in place some very, very effective programs to reduce collisions. Just to finish off the session, I'd like to focus on one more area before bringing this to a close, and I'd like to look at sources of data and risk financing. And in our experience, getting funding or resources or time to be able to focus on work-related road safety is often one of the key barriers to developing an effective, sustainable program. So in our experience, there are 4 or 5 ways in which resources can be obtained to develop a work-related road safety program. Clearly, developing a business case, and we've already looked at the beginning of this session at the societal, business, legal and financial areas of the business case. Some people summarize that as MEL, or the MEL approach, which is moral, economic and legal factors. If you need any support to make a business case, we have some really good documents and templates, and again, I'll happily share them with you. Another source of risk financing is through insurance captive, if you're self-insured, and in the best programs we've been involved in, quite often the insurance captive has been used to help sponsor and fund risk management. Again, if you need some support to understand how to tap into that, we'll happily have that discussion with you. Insurers are quite often a good source of support for programs through their own risk management initiatives, but also through bursaries and other support to help fund interventions. It's always worth asking your insurer the question, would you be able to support our risk management program? Similarly with your leasing company and also with vehicle suppliers, both of whom have been known to support programs on risk management. And finally, obviously being able to evaluate your program, have some long-term sustained results to show the effectiveness in terms of collision reductions and cost reductions, that also helps with the business case. And BRAKE has some great resources actually and opportunities to support that. For example, the BRAKE Awards give organisations an opportunity very effectively to showcase their programs, and evaluation is a key part of that process. So finally, to pull all that together, there are some significant opportunities to cut costs through fleet safety, risk management and work-related road safety programs. The beginning point is to understand and quantify what the costs are and to identify any kind of sources of funding for a program and use that as part of a wider business case along with the moral, economic and legal factors. Cost data then can also be really effectively used to target interventions and also to help support kind of sustained long-term programs. I've mentioned once or twice during the session that resources are available if you would like to have access to them. So for example, the cost model, the business case template, any other guidance related to this topic, please feel free to give me a call or send me an email, and I will happily share more information with you or discuss your own costs with you or just help you in terms of making a business case. Just finally, I really appreciate the opportunity from BRAKE and BT Fleet to be able to participate in this session, and I just encourage you to have a look in real detail at the opportunities from looking at road safety costs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Will, for that really interesting webcast, and I hope you have picked up some really useful tips there. And as Will has pointed out, if you have any questions at all, then please do not hesitate to contact Will directly or come through Break. I hope you will also listen to some of our other webcasts in this series on the topic of saving money through fleet risk management, which has kindly been sponsored by BT Fleet.